My name is Spencer Wicks. I'm the CEO of Expana. Expana is a commodity data pricing analytics business. The difference is we're focused specifically on the commodities that go into food. So think of all the weird and wonderful things that are on the shelf, the wild west of commodities, I like to call it. It's that stuff that we're experts on. So all the pricing data around that, so historic, current, future, all the intelligence around that we supply to operators in the food supply chain, supermarkets, wholesalers, etc. I've been with the company since 2018, and I joined from a succession of business information companies. Most recently before that was a business that was called Metal Bulletin that changed into Fast Markets. Prior to that, I was at Data Monitor. Won't go back into the midst of time, but really the theme of my career most recently in the last couple of decades is really about sort of B2B data, subscription businesses, business information, commodities specifically, and pricing information. That's the kind of sweet spot of my career. I've had the privilege to work for some utterly amazing companies like the ones I mentioned and great people that I've learned from. Ryan and I first came into contact just as I was leaving Fast Markets, actually, as I was transitioning into the role that I have here for a business that used to be called Mintec. So that's what people may know the name of the business originally, but it's called Expana. And I knew that I had to hire out a number of people in senior roles. And the one that first came to mind was sales leadership, who would take the helm to build professionally run commercial organization, like the kind that I've been lucky to work with. I knew that was a starting point. And so Ryan and I quickly connected, and he came through. The transition really from the previous business that I worked at to Expana, formerly known as Mintec, I would say is completely by design. You could always argue there are things, serendipity and chance, that accelerates those things. But the broad aim of what I wanted to do in my career was very much focused around the leadership role, being a CEO. I felt that in previous roles that I had learnt all the necessary things that one needed to do to run a business, from managing a P&L, understanding how to build a leadership team, products, data, all those kinds of things. I learned that from the people I worked for, frankly. So I really felt that it was part of what I was going to do next. And I was really just looking for the right opportunity. That came about having followed the business that I eventually joined, called Mintec, now known as Expana, because I'd looked at the business from a position of a potential partner or even an acquisition from my previous company. And I was fascinated by the fact that this is, although a small family-run business at the time, was a business that seemed to uniquely have a solution around pricing information for food commodities. No one else was doing it in quite the same way. And I believe there was a huge opportunity to take price discovery, business intelligence to the next level in food commodities in a way that wasn't really being done outside metals and forestry products and energy. That was the opportunity I saw. So as soon as the business was looking for a new leader, I jumped in. And I guess what's unusual about my entry into the business was not that I responded to any kind of recruitment or headhunting exercise. I actually pitched the business directly myself. They didn't know me. I knew quite a bit about them from the outside in, at least. And I basically kicked the door down and made a cold call pitch, which is probably a lesson for lots of people. Don't wait for an invitation. And if you feel confident, just jump in there. And I explained to them what I think I knew about the business and what I could do. They were open-minded enough to give it a shot. Here I am several years later.
That's a great story, and credit to you for doing that. I hadn't realized. And actually, when I sort of give career advice sometimes to individuals, and they ask if they should message a CEO or a chair directly, and my answer to that question is no CEO or chair is going to be unhappy about a potential employee or potential talented person emailing them or messaging
one of the characteristics I think people really want is real energy and enthusiasm. If you just look at a CV for most people, you're going to be hard pressed to know the difference between lots of different people. But the person who puts himself out, who's spent time thinking about a product, the sector, and has real passion for doing it, is the person that's going to break through in many cases. If you're confident, it's absolutely worth doing. What's the worst going to happen? But you'll be surprised. People are really looking for that differentiator, that sort of armor-piercing interest and focus. If you can show that to people, they know that you're likely to push harder than anybody else. You still need all the other characteristics and traits, but I would say that's the key thing, in my view.
Yeah. What's the most challenging part of your job?
The most challenging part, I would say, is recruitment, and particularly building out the senior leadership team. So when I came in, there was very little in terms of overall employees generally, but particularly in sort of the senior leadership roles. And it's still something that I work very hard on, trying to get recruitment right. And I would say it's still the most challenging part. even in a very well-run process, there's still so much that goes to chance. I mean, what people present to you as their CVs, the references you can get, their supposed track record, all this stuff, is often very hard to look behind. And you
Yes.
want to minimize the danger of hiring them and then regretting it. So I would say the biggest challenges I have and where I still strive to get better is around recruitment. And it goes right the way through the company at a senior level, because ultimately people make such a huge difference. Yeah, you have to have a market and you have to have a product that fits, all the rest of it. But particularly in a company our size, and in fact any size, the shift that happens when you get the right person in the right role, and just trying to focus on A players and
Yes.
just being ruthless about not tolerating people who are below that. And it's so easy to gum an organization up with people who are B players, C players, and what happens is they themselves beget other B players who are C players, and C players beget D players.
Yes.
And before you know it, the sort of energy and drive and innovation of the business starts to change, the care and attention to detail. And so I really think the focusing on the recruitment is one of the biggest challenges in the job.
You can never be 100% certain, but you can certainly minimize the risk by doing a number of different things. The next question I have is, what are the biggest lessons you've learned? I'd be quite interested generally, whether there's any insights that you have around the hiring process and things that you've done to try and get the hiring right.
Yeah, as I say, I'm still very much a work in progress on the hiring side. I've certainly been lucky to hire some really amazing people, but equally I've had some terrible clangers, and I think that's
Yes.
not unusual. I guess what you got to do to stack it in your favor is to spend more time with it, get as many viewpoints as possible, really deep referencing, psychometric tests, and all that kind of stuff. But I also think, is have a really clear timeline in your mind for when is it not going well and what am I going to do about it. A lot of people see performance management as highly inconvenient because it disrupts a beautiful little system you've built, and it becomes it's bad PR and all the rest of it. But I think it's something you've got to be, as much as you should be clear about what a great hire should look like, how long you're going to give it, and what are the sort of the milestones, or you move someone out if need be. So in terms of lessons learned, I'm still learning that lesson around recruitment. And the other thing I'm realizing as I overall lead things like product development, technology investment, the build of teams, is having a really clear perspective on the timeline. So I find myself being more and more focusing on the judgment of time and being quite realistic about how long things take. And I think that's an attribute I've got, which I've developed quite well, which is the reality of how long things take. So building that into the strategy. And one of the things I would say as an aspect of that is how difficult it is to do customer communication. So we're regularly, announcing things, whether it's a new product or something in the news, or preparing people for another product release. We had things in the past around brand and acquisitions. It's amazing how much work you have to do to actually penetrate through to the customer. It's so easy to think they've heard you. You really have to overdo the customer communication. You should almost assume that they still haven't heard it. Building that in to your assumptions is really important, I would say.
Yeah, I think many businesses assume that their customers know exactly what they do. And I think that, as you say, the reality is they probably know you for one thing that you do that serves them, but anything around.
I mean, and we've all seen those logos of customers on a nice PowerPoint slide. And typically what it means is you've got your foot in the door with one little bit of one little division, and they have one view of your product. So you actually have to do so much communication around evangelizing. I think one of the biggest parts of the role I have is as chief evangelist, is evangelizing the company, our solution to the market, why people need to buy us. It's not always obvious to people why they should buy us, because this industry itself is learning to adopt data and digitalize. And so we, in our position as the market leaders in the category, we have to do a lot of evangelism, and that is communicating to customers. So I think that's a key learning that I've heard, that it takes so much longer. And as you get more and more customers, that's what you have to do. And you also have to make sure within the customer base that it's not just the user. If your user is a sort of mid-level person, what about the economic sponsor? What about the person right at the top who you may or may not be communicating with? What's their view of you? So you need to make sure they understand the benefits of your business. So if they don't use it, they're going to sign off on it.
Yeah, economic buy is important. And just on the timeline thing, I know you were referring to communication with customers, but are you saying generally then you have a good idea of how long things will take as opposed to I often do that. I think something's going to take me a day or an hour, and 3 days later I'm still
I would say
working on it.
The few things that I feel like I've got increasingly got a handle on, I see myself, I'm at once person that likes to get into the detail of things, but I also, I am the captain of the ship in my role. When everybody's asleep, I'm upstairs looking out navigating, thinking
Yeah.
about how to turn the ship. And I like to have a good feel for the cadence of the business and how long things are going to take to turn. So what's it like for a year or 2 years or 3 years, and then working back how long is it going to take to do those things based on my experience, to migrate customers to a new platform, to launch something, to develop this or hire this or create this. I'm still quite surprised about how unrealistic people are about how long things take. And things can be a lot quicker than you think, but I just, that feeling, I think the ownership of the timeline of the business, and it helps if you're good about judging that, if you've got intuition about that, you can make the right judgments at the right time and also know not to do certain things. So a business that is preparing itself for an exit, for example, should be working backwards to work out when is peak margin and when is peak EBITDA level, peak ARR growth, all the right KPIs, when's the right time to create to accelerate and have your sort of perfect moment of that, and then to hold back perhaps on some areas where that's for a future cycle, and to really have a feel for how long it takes, and often having those discussions with your managers about, right, we need to press the pedal now to get this in place, and then the right time to hold back. It's good to communicate, particularly with your senior managers, about the overall timelines of things, but as CEO, to hold on to that key role as the chronometer, because that will be the first thing that matters about decisions for any strategy, I would say.
Okay, very useful. Where do you draw inspiration from, or where do you go if you're sort of working through business challenges that you might be struggling with?
They say often, don't they, that the role of the chief executive can be a very lonely position. Everybody looks up, but where do you look at? Well, so you might have shareholders and you might have a chairperson. Actually, we don't have a chair in our current business, but I would say inspiration, yeah, or a source of sort of advice. I think a lot of it I've already learned, because I would say in the position I've got to and able to do the things I am able to do, although there's a lot I'm not, clearly, simply through the sum of my career. So you don't arrive at a role without having hopefully learned a huge amount of things. So I would say that I've built up a series of models in my mind, a series of understanding that has come very much through the places that I've worked. So great companies like Your Money, great people I work for there, Data Monitor and other companies. So these people who taught me the models of the industry. And so they're no longer intuitions, they're kind of pre-conscious truths about how the market works and what you need to do. So I find myself in many cases ready-made for the kinds of things we're doing, because after all, what we're doing at Expana, whilst unique in many aspects and original, is based on some very, very core classic sort of models of recurring revenue businesses. So I've drawn on that. I am by nature quite self-confident and self-reliant, so I don't personally always reach out to people. So I find myself having a confidence that I can do that, and I don't really need a lot of people's advice. I don't go out and seek it. I'm lucky to have a very strong board that I can speak to and senior managers. But I would say the background I have in working for some great businesses has really provided that confidence about what to do. I'm also, I think you've got to be quite self-effacing. You've got to be, if you're not sure about something, listen. You need to listen to people and not have a presumption about things. But once it's clear in my mind, I tend to go for things. I don't sort of navel gaze too much about things.
And you touched on some of the hiring earlier. We talked about talent, but what advice can you give for those looking to build high-performing teams?
I would say that you want to make sure that high-performing team, people with big egos and empire builders are not part of the team build. I think it's very important that you try to see, could this team get on well with each other? Can they interact? Because it's very much about a team enterprise. So do they have the characteristics that they're likely to be unselfish, that they're going to focus on the corporate mission? Because if you introduce someone that on the surface might look like they're a high performer, they've done all these things, but they're likely to be toxic, i.e. they're not going to interact with colleagues, they're going to be political, they're going to try to build their own empire, they're not going to be collegiate, they don't have those characteristics. What you find is that however capable they are technically, that will not overwhelm the group dynamic. So it's quite important to have people that will get on with each other and not don't end up as blockers. And I think that's the key thing, because what you're going to be doing as the CEO with the senior leadership team is constantly looking at problem solving, trying to innovate, trying to think ahead. And that requires constant communication between people. And I have seen in the past examples where somebody is not willing to give out information, not willing to help, not willing to, what they appear to lose faith. I think the key thing is if you see one whiff of those bad characteristics, that toxicity, I would be very, very careful about it. So I would go back to the recruitment process, go back to referencing, go back to other people who've worked with that person. And if there's any sense of that, what I've learned is that it's just not worth it. You'll come to regret it later down the road. The best leaders are the people who are technically competent, very hardworking, driven. They're commercially minded. Wherever this is in the organization, they're commercially minded. They know how the whole thing joins up to winning more of the market. And they're very good communicators. They're sharing information, they're talking to each other, and they're not blockers. The blockers tend to be people who by nature are just difficult, or they're people who are worried of their status and they're worried that they are not looking good in front of other people. So if you can break that down, you're more likely to have a higher performance team. As soon as you got those people who are blocking the team from talking and communicating to each other, that's where you get a lot of difficulty, I find. It's not quite the perfect analogy, but I'm thinking of the explorer Sir Ranulph Fiennes, who I've actually met many times. A long time ago, I worked on his book and helped publish his book, and I asked him, how do you hire people to go on your expeditions? A lot of the time you're doing solo things, but you've done these expeditions, you've done, two-man jobs crossing the Antarctic and all stuff. He said all the things I need tough people and, navigators, blah. But he said, the one thing I can't have was anybody with a funny tick or that got selfish or irritable, because he said it's all fine and dandy interviewing them in the Royal Geographical Society when they've got a jacket on, it's warm. You put them in the tent 3 weeks in and they're cold, they're grumpy, and they've got an annoying tick, like they pick their nose or they cut their toenails on your sleeping bag, or they are selfish because they've suddenly got cold. He said those are the things that suddenly you realise they're the blockers. So my analogy would be try to find out those characteristics that act as blockers within a management team when they're not collegiate, when they're not sharing, they're not looking on the joint mission, and they're trying to focus on themselves. And above all, the other thing I would say is really important is a real intelligence. Now you might say, well, anybody being hired as senior manager is going to be intelligent. You'd be surprised. Some people just are really not that quick, and you've got to have people who can pick up ideas and theories and understand things quite quickly. Some people are just not intelligent enough. So you've got to have people who are really adroit, smart, quick, strategic, but all over the detail as well.
Yeah, and I think back to the Ranulph Fiennes comments and what you learned from him, it's sort of a reference question could be, what's this person like on a bad day? Or how do they react
I always say
around them when things aren't going well?
When I interview salespeople, I always think, what's this person going to be like on a rainy Tuesday in November when they've missed a month? Can I see what they would be like beyond this sort of very positive persona thing? And what you want is people who are going to pick themselves up, relentlessness. And I think we'll come back to that when we talk about sort of senior revenue leaders and commercial leaders, what are the key characteristics. But some people are fair weather people, and as soon as you put them in a bind or there's an interrogation of some kind around what they're doing, or they can react badly, you've got to be able to operate in all weathers.
If you think about the best revenue leader, or could be leaders that you work with, what do you think made or makes them successful in your view?
By the way, within the organization, aside from perhaps the CEO, I think the revenue leader is the most under the spotlight, the most under duress, the most in focus. Such a big role. The characteristics I want and I see in the successful revenue leaders are they're strategic, they're able to think about the big picture, but they're also all over the detail. There's somebody you can talk to about individual accounts, what's going on with the client, but they're never that far removed, and they can all do a product demo. So many senior people get so far away from the product that it becomes almost, it's so theoretical. They need to be close to the product, the detail, but also have the sort of big strategy. They need to be really good at recruiting, but they also need to be relentless about removing people out. So a lot of senior managers dither, I'd include myself in this, as much as they have the KPIs, metrics for success. What does it look like when it doesn't work out? What is your timeline to do something about? So I think a successful revenue leader is really good at that recruitment. It matters so much when you get a really fantastic BDM or a fantastic account manager, or business can just pick up a new lease of life. So that recruitment capability, and equally, because you won't get it all right, a pretty ruthless removal of people that are poor performers. So having some kind of process around that, bottom 10%, bottom 20%, whatever it is. And I see so many people failing because they dither on the difficult decisions, and just keeping someone in that's not any good. And I know the other side of the formula. People think, oh, well, how long is it going to take to find someone else? Well, it's always better to find someone else. It's always better to find someone to keep someone in, because what you're also doing is not only dropping down your average standards and your capabilities, but you're also indicating to other people that we accept B players. I'm pretty keen on just making sure we always have the very, very best people. The other successful attribute of a commercial leader, I think, is focusing on the inputs, not just the outcomes. So this person would be brilliant at telling you all the detail, great at forecasting next quarter, 2 quarters after that, whatever, but they're really focused on the foundational elements around building pipeline, for example, making sure that they're really active on the pipeline generation of new business, cross-sell, upsell, and they're tracking all those metrics, because we all know if you get all that right and you have a good product, you tend to have some very good outcomes. So I think focusing on that and being realistic about what you need to deliver that in terms of pipeline coverage and all the rest of it. But the other thing in terms of the characteristic mentioned earlier on of relentlessness. So relentlessly optimistic, the best people I've seen, they're not put off. Yeah, they may pivot a bit on a tactic or something like that. They're not put off. They know they're going to have some bad days, but they're already thinking about how to improve it. And that enduring characteristic, that mental toughness, I think is the hardest thing to get. And always be smiling, always be picking yourself up, always facing the team, and not perturbed by anything, and never put off.
Well, I think that's important because you can get a lot of people who are pretty resilient and pick themselves up. But I think with a leader, it's also how they pick themselves up. So you can pick yourself up and keep going. You can be moody and whatever else if you're an individual contributor.
That's why I think the characteristics of being very even keeled. So you might by default be, always a bit chipper. That's fine. But fluctuating in your moods, being seen to be volatile, people can then read you and they read into things that, when things are good or bad. That steady calmness is a very, very hard thing to do, but it signals so much to the organization about confidence, which they get. All these classic sort of things, like confidence, momentum, they all come from people's moods and feelings and how confident you are about things. If you're measured and you're a good planner and you're not perturbed by things, companies are usually very, very busy. Our company's very busy. But one thing I would say is that we're not frenetic. We're not charging around, tripping over ourselves, trying to do this or that. We've got an orderly way of doing things, led, I believe, by people who are pretty calm and organized, who are relentlessly optimistic, but are not foolish, and they're honest and open. We don't have people, we remove anybody who is toxic, because you won't have people who can talk to each other. You won't have people raising problems because they feel it's a difficult environment. You've got to have an environment where people are not afraid to raise things that are problematic because they realize they're not worrying about its reflection on them. They're thinking about how is the business overall going to be improved. And those are all hard things to try and achieve, but I think those are the most important things.
And you're obviously a very commercial guy, commercial CEO, so I feel you should give a pretty good answer here. But if I was to drop you into a sort of B2B subscription business and I asked you to sort of diagnose or assess a go-to-market function, what's the first thing that you would be looking for to try and understand what's going on, to be able to diagnose and therefore start to sort of impact some change?
To diagnose the business itself, if I was put into it?
Well, it could be diagnose the business, or it could be diagnose the go-to-market or the sales function. Something that is not right. What's the first thing that you're doing to try and understand why?
Yeah, so I'd start with the customers. Have we got a clear view of who they are, by extension, how many of them there are, and what the market opportunity is? Do we have a clear idea of problem we're trying to solve that is worth them spending money on? Because that will then flow back to the pitch. And then have we got the weapon to solve that? So, what's the product makeup? How good is it? How easy is it to use? How differentiated is it? And then have we got the sales or commercial organization that is the right type to interface with that market? So the market's there, and you've got something or something brewing, but above all, have you got a commercial organization that can interface well? And you don't need to be successful. You don't actually need the biggest market. You don't actually need the best product. We do at Expana. We have the biggest market and we have the best product by a long shot. So we're really lucky. But if you have a really poorly run, insufficiently resourced commercial organization, you're never going to succeed. So it's then looking through the sales, or the commercial team, I should say, and look at how is it structured. So, my classic go-to is account management, separated from new logo hunters, BDMs, separated from CST and SDRs and marketing. But you can move things amazingly quickly with a very good sales team. So, and if you don't have a very good sales team, but you have all those other things, you're going to be incapacitated. So that's one of the early things I did when I joined this business. I just looked at the people we had in it, and there were some good people which we kept, and then there were some bad people we moved out very, very quickly. And we created a structure, the optimum structure that could grow over time, but that was fit the size of the business and how we're going to move. And then hired, is the commercial leader up to it, the work that we did way back when, and having that commercial leader come in and work with you on building out that team along that structure that I mentioned, account management, BDRs, SDRs, BDMs, etc. Then giving them a very clear understanding of, creating all the right collateral, the right decks, but also have a very, very clear rate cards. So often organizations go to seed because they get too many products and the sales team lose confidence, and then they kind of make up pricing on the way. So you need to get control of the pricing quite early on. And it's perfectly okay not to have the perfect version. When I came into this business, the pricing was all over the place, and I created the rate card straight away. And we since refined it, but I created something that was simple, quite ambitious, but no one was any doubt that that's what we're going to use. And it reset the relationship with the clients. I also think it's important to look at the chemistry of the commercial team. Are they going cap-handed to clients? Are they on the back foot? Are they kind of hand-wringing and lacking confidence? Or are they super confident, which they should be, making sure the clients respect them and therefore pay the right price, making sure that the data is protected, there are the right MSAs. And so I'd be looking for a commercial leader to attune very much to that and to enact that. And that, the first thing they're doing is hiring the right team, and then you pick up on the product development and your data and all the rest of it, but you can change things quite quickly with a focus on the commercial team within 6 months easily.
Yeah.
And then something else happens. The clients you're talking to, if they didn't respect you, they now respect you. They now see you on a different footing. They see that actually you're going to play serious, that you will charge more.
I remember you saying it to me. It's like, if you're charging them what you should be charging them, they then see the value, right?
You've got to have a fair exchange of value. So you're not giving it away. There's no charity number above the door. They're not fools and they don't owe you anything. So where are you going to meet in the middle? You're going to give them something fairly priced, not overpriced, not underpriced either, fairly priced, because it solves a real problem for them. And you can be really clear about what that is. And we're very clear in our business. And then that's it. And if they don't want it, you shouldn't worry about it. Pat them away and they'll come back. But you've got to have this attitude that this is a fair exchange. We're respectful, but we're confident about what we do. And you've got to have the people like that. No more, no less. You can't afford to pay for it. You don't get it because it's our mistake. We haven't explained it. That's it. But I'm not giving you anything. I'm not allowing you to be like that, because you'll get put into a category where you're kind of like the cheap seats and get pushed around. If you want to move yourself up the value curve, increase your ACV because you're doing something valuable, if it's worth what it is, you've got to have the people that believe that. And then the leadership have got to empower the sales team to say no to people, to terminate people, to push back, and you've got to give them that freedom. You don't do a deal at any cost because you're trying to reset the premium nature of the business. And that will affect your revenues.
Yeah.
And if you just you have that confidence and you give that permission to the team, empower them to be like that, you'll be successful.
Thank you. Last question. Is there any technology or something about your market that excites you most?
Yes, there are. I mean, what overall excites me about it, it's the same that excited me right at the beginning, was the size of this market. So we're talking about what we call the agri-food complex. It's the biggest in the world. By some measures, it's 9 to 10% of world GDP. And the fact that when we talk about the commodities in this sector, think about wheat, think about vegetable oils, think about spices, think about seafood, all the things that we cover, it's really hard to find accurate, reliable information. And that's what we do. So it's the opacity of the market, the continuing opacity of the market. It's such a difficult space to get clarity on. And we're providing that solution. That excites me, that we're getting that message out, people are seeing that, and then to that opacity add greater and greater volatility, so prices going up and down. There are no flat charts in our business, and all that gives us an opportunity to show people how to save money. But when it comes to technology, I mean, we're pretty advanced, I would say. I mean, when I just look at some people we know and talk to, I would say we're a pretty advanced business, actually. We think of ourselves as data nerds, so data analytics, pricing information. So we have a lot of people who do quite advanced work here. And of course, we have been using, and we are continuing to use artificial intelligence. The reason that excites me is because it seems to solve a problem that I've been looking to solve for about the last 10 or 15 years. So in almost every business information company I've worked for, I've found that one of the great things about the business, they had a lot of information. But one of the bad things about those businesses, they had a lot of information. So the problem is, however well an organized system it is, often is overwhelmed by the choices of things to do. They're looking for the needle in the haystack, but they rarely get pricked by it directly. They have to do, even in a very, very well done UI, often have to do a lot of looking and finding of things. So that element of personalization, that element of bringing things to the fore, probably for the first time, and I've been looking at lots of different solutions to this over the years, the ability to create a bespoke news feed or create a custom report or automatically select the right price series you should use from the hundreds that we have. So this idea of bringing right for you and your attention right now is the promise of one aspect of artificial intelligence, which we deploy. We have the world's largest database of pricing information and other information, fundamentals, etc. Our large language model is trained on all that information. So it's not public data, it's our private data. So it arguably will hallucinate less than a publicly trained LLM.
Yes.
But what it's able to do is present to you, Ryan, interested in vegetable oils or dairy, exactly the thing that you're looking for, because we know what you're doing. You've asked us a few questions. And so that has the promise of AI in the way we're deploying it. And that's what we're bringing to the market this year. And I think that is extremely powerful, because it tells you what you need to know right now without you looking around.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be exciting to see how well we continue to execute on that. But certainly the customer base are very interested in that. They've got a sea of data. How do they just get what they want? Not even that asking, it will prompt people. I think that is what companies like mine have been able to access in the last couple of years, where access to the AI, LLM, the training models and all the tools necessary are accessible now. You can get it through Azure. The people who can develop those things have created at least one product in the last 2 or 3 years. Further back in time, it was not affordable and there were no people doing it. So now we can do that.
Sounds brilliant. Not only the accuracy of the information that someone needs, but getting it to them very quickly, right?
Yeah. Just what is it I need to know? Show me what other people are looking at. Give me the price I need. Building cost models for you, building dashboards, building risk modules, all those kind of things. Yeah, that is why customers will come to you willing to pay reasonable amounts of money to solve their problems.
Awesome. Well, that's it, Spencer. Thank you for today. And I know for a fact that there'll be many folks out there who'd be very interested to understand your business, and probably a number of them that would have heard of you and be quite curious as to what you're doing and how you're doing things. So
excellent.
And cheers, Spencer.
Take care.